Imagine walking into a grand, gold-adorned cathedral in Rome. The air is thick with incense, and sitting on the papal throne is the Pope himself. Except, he isn't breathing. He has been dead for 9 months. His flesh is gray and rotting, his skeletal hands are wrapped around a golden staff, and he is dressed in the most exquisite, holy vestments. Standing before him is the current pope, screaming questions at the corpse. And next to the rotting body stands a young, terrified priest whose only job is to speak on behalf of the dead man. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This actually happened in the year 897 AD. It is known to history as the Cadaver Synod, the most bizarre, grotesque, and jaw-dropping trial in human history. How did the Catholic Church, at the absolute height of its medieval power, end up putting a decomposing corpse on trial? And what did the dead man supposedly do to deserve it? Buckle up, because the story of Pope Formosus and the trial of his corpse is a wild ride of medieval politics, betrayals, and absolute madness.
To understand why someone would dig up a dead pope, we first have to understand who he was when he was breathing. His name was Formosus, and in the late 9th century, he was one of the church's most effective diplomats. He was brilliant, ambitious, and highly successful at converting entire kingdoms to Christianity. But success in 9th century Rome was a dangerous thing. Back then, the papacy wasn't just a spiritual office, it was a political prize. Rome was a chaotic war zone ruled by corrupt, warring noble families. Popes were routinely poisoned, strangled, or beaten to death by their rivals. Formosus got caught right in the middle of this power struggle. At one point, he fell out of favor with the reigning pope, John VIII, who accused Formosus of treason, conspiracy to seize the papacy, and violating church laws. Formosus was excommunicated and fled Rome in fear for his life. But Formosus was a survivor. After Pope John was conveniently assassinated, beaten with a hammer by his own retinue, Formosus was eventually welcomed back. And in the year 891, he did the ultimate comeback. He was elected Pope Formosus. But his troubles were just beginning. To keep his power, Formosus had to navigate Rome's deadliest rivalry. On one side was the powerful Spoleto family, who wanted to control the Holy Roman Empire. On the other side was Arnulf of Carinthia, a powerful German king. Formosus originally crowned a Spoleto prince as emperor, but secretly he hated them. He begged King Arnulf to invade Rome and liberate the papacy. Arnulf did just that, and in retaliation, Formosus crowned Arnulf as the true Holy Roman Emperor. The Spoleto family was furious. They had been publicly humiliated by the Pope. They vowed revenge. But before they could get it, Formosus suffered a stroke and died in 896. He was buried peacefully in St. Peter's Basilica, or so everyone thought.
Just a few months after Formosus died, the Spoleto family regained control of Rome. They installed their own puppet onto the papal throne, a man named Pope Stephen VI. The Spoletos wanted blood, but Formosus was already in the dirt. So they demanded the next best thing, a trial. They forced Pope Stephen to do the unthinkable. In January of 897, Pope Stephen ordered gravediggers to enter the sacred tombs of St. Peter's, exhume the body of Formosus, and drag his rotting corpse out into the light. They dressed the 9-month-old corpse in full sacred papal robes, placed the papal crown on his decaying head, and propped him up on a throne in the Basilica of San Giovanni in Laterano. The trial was called the Synod Horrenda, the Horrible Synod. A group of cardinals and bishops gathered as the jury. Pope Stephen stood before the corpse, red-faced, screaming accusations at the rotting remains. He accused Formosus of perjury, of violating canon law by switching bishoprics, and of illegally seizing the papacy. Since dead men tell no tales, Stephen had appointed a teenage deacon to stand next to the corpse and act as his defense attorney. Imagine being that young deacon. Every time the Pope screamed a question at the corpse, the terrified deacon had to mimic a voice and squeak out excuses on behalf of the dead Pope. Unsurprisingly, the corpse lost the trial.
Once the guilty verdict was handed down, the court moved to the punishment. First, they stripped the decaying body of its sacred vestments. Then, they declared all of Formosus's acts, ordinations, and decrees as Pope null and void, instantly throwing the entire European Church into chaos. Next, they cut off the 3 fingers on his right hand, the blessing fingers he had used to ordain priests and crown emperors. Finally, his mutilated body was dragged through the muddy streets of Rome, jeered at by crowds, and thrown like common garbage into the Tiber River. But the story doesn't end in the river. Shortly after the trial, a massive earthquake shook Rome, severely damaging the Lateran Basilica where the trial took place. The superstitious public took this as a direct sign of God's anger. They realized they had desecrated a pope. A massive riot erupted in Rome. The furious public marched on the palace, captured Pope Stephen VI, stripped him of his robes, locked him in a dungeon, and strangled him to death. Meanwhile, Formosus's body washed up on the banks of the Tiber. Legend says a local monk secretly buried it, and miracles began to be reported at the gravesite. The very next pope, Theodore II, officially annulled the Cadaver Synod. He had Formosus's body dug up again, this time to be reburied in St. Peter's Basilica with full honors, dressed once more in his holy robes. The Cadaver Synod remains the absolute lowest point in the history of the papacy. It was a bizarre moment where political hatred became so blinding that not even death, nor the sanctity of the grave, could stop a quest for revenge. The next time you think modern politics has gotten too wild, just remember, at least we aren't digging up our opponents to yell at their skeletons. If you enjoyed this bizarre trip into history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable historical tales, and let us know in the comments. What's the craziest historical event you've ever heard of? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.